Okay. Well, there seemed to be a lot of hands up when we left. Can anybody pick up the thread? Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard you many times the self-transforming machine type stuff. And what I recognize you very much insisted that the DMT realm is a very alien realm, very unlike something like Jung's archetypes, etc. But when I hear your descriptions of these entities, which I have not encountered, though I tried, I hear a fairly an image of an elemental spirit, which we would call in Western sort of folk mythology, in the sense that one, just because you use the word elf, though I know they don't really look like necessarily like classical elves, but the sense of a small entity doing a lot of work that is neither good nor bad, in the sense it's sort of mischievous, it's not demonic, but it's not, an angel. And the sort of sense of them being small and doing a lot of work comes to me very much as a sort of impression of an elemental. And one, if you could just respond to that, and also, to me, then I just think of your own particular racial heritage and the fact that the main elemental spirits that one thinks of are often these little Celtic little fairy dudes, and how you sort of, I'm sure you've thought of this to some degree, but how you sort of integrate these things.
Well, some of you may know this book. It's a classic called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by Evans Vance. And it was reprinted recently, and I wrote the introduction to it. It mentions in there, when Patrick arrived as a missionary in Ireland to convert the pagan Irish, the problem that he encountered was this belief in the land of fairies. And he, in order to convert the pagan Irish, he convinced them that these were souls of the dead in an intermediate zone that was neither heaven nor hell, which he called purgatory. Purgatory was invented to accommodate the folk beliefs of the pagan Irish. And when it was brought back to Rome, it seemed like such a good idea for converting all kinds of pagan peoples on the fringe of the expanding sphere of Christianity that it's been in place ever since. I've wondered, I think I even talked sometime this week to somebody about the way in which there's a kind of a racial or a genetic undertone about some of this stuff. I never really felt, I didn't know till I was 13 years old that I wasn't a white person, because I grew up in Colorado where everything was white bread culture. And my father may have had opinions about the IRA and all that, but we were never told, that we were Irish. And, some of you who have roots in this city know that as recently as 50 years ago, they used to have signs up along 8th Avenue that said, "No dogs or Irish allowed." So, I reconnected to that part of the heritage. The Irish are stereotypically known to be susceptible to intoxication, to be great word spinners, and to have this peculiar relationship to fairyland or something. I don't want to think that I'm just exploring the Celtic collective unconscious. It seems to me these things must be there for everybody. Nevertheless, we're so concerned to suppress racial differences because we're a democracy and because racial problems have haunted American politics from the very beginning, that we tend to want to believe that everybody is different. Everybody is the same. But in fact, I took a course once at Cal, it was interesting. It was given by the forensics department, the only course I ever took in the forensics department. and it was called Biochemical Markers for Individuality. And one of the things we did, it was actually taught by Alexander Shulgin, the great drug designer. And one of the things we did is he brought in a little vial of some kind of chemical, and he passed it around, and out of 200 people in the class, 198 couldn't smell it at all, and 2 people were so overwhelmed by the smell of this that they actually became physically sick for a few minutes. Well, what this is, and then he explained to us, these people were probably up to 50,000 times more sensitive to this chemical than most people, and that this is a gene that you carry for sensitivity to this thing. Well, those kinds of compounds, aromatic compounds, compounds with an electronically active ring structure, are the very nearest relatives to drugs. And so it's reasonable to suppose that there are genetic differences in the way we relate to drugs, which doesn't mean racial differences. It means from person to person. But it also may mean, that what a race is a collection of related genes that are more frequently found together than not. This is why, technically speaking, you can never say so-and-so belongs to a race, because a race is a quality of a group. It's not something an individual is. You have to have a bunch of people before you can say that you're confronting a phenomenon of race. So it may be that what Aboriginal people believe is that there are shamanic lines, family lines, with a greater susceptibility to these things than others. So one of the things you learn when you begin to explore psychedelic substances is that it isn't hitting everybody the same way. In fact, it can hit people radically different ways. Society misrepresents drugs tremendously. For example, we all know the stereotyped image of the pothead. The pothead can't work, can't remember. It's the inarticulate, dumb hippie image. Well, I've never met anyone with a deeper devotion to cannabis than myself. And, I'm very proud of my memory and my ability to get verbally organized under almost any conditions. So I completely violate the stereotype of what it is to be a pothead. Well, how many people are there like that? I mean, I'm always amazed when people say, no, I don't want to smoke any pot. It'll mess with my memory. I mean, really? How peculiar. So what you have to do, it's just like every other thing. Everything you've been told is wrong, and you have to take life by the handlebars and figure out what's really going on, which doesn't mean that you're reckless. I mean, there are bad drugs, there are bad politics, there are bad relationships. I hope that answered your question. It was a two-part question, though.
It still seems to me that these entities are in many ways similar to the sort of elemental spirits, and whether you think of that is a possible explanation for...
Well, when you say they're like elemental spirits, is that because you spend a lot of time with elemental spirits?
Well, I mean, taught just various stories, taught just the...
It's true, they are. I mean, they don't look like them, though. They don't look like anything. There was a really bad movie. Those of you who don't have kids can tune out here, but since I have kids, I've seen a lot of bad movies because that's what they make for kids. And I think it was 4 or 5 years ago at Christmas time, there was this movie called Santa Claus. Tune out on. But there was one scene in the elves' workshop where they were making thousands of toys, and there were all these conveyor belts going from level to level, and these guys rushing around at full speed. It was the most DMT-like reconstruction I've ever seen. So it's funny, though, that the elf mythology doesn't carry the sense of strangeness that you get in the DMT flash, although I suspect that what that is that we've been polluted by Disney. That Disney has given us this vision of fairies, and number two, harmless. And, it's the Tinkerbell phenomenon. Because if you go back before, is it Andrew Lang who wrote all those books, the blue fairy book, the brown fairy book, the white fairy book? Those are weird, those stories. I mean, fairies are weird. They steal babies. That's their main way of relating to human beings, is they steal human infants and leave behind wizened, deformed, sickly creatures who become very strange and peripheral kinds of human beings. And fairies, if you get trapped in fairyland, the only way out is through, and they're language-oriented. They will never do you damage if you can convince them that you're a master of words. It's poetry that they like. And all over the world, there is this persistent motif of these small entities. Well, I'm not suggesting that they're really there, but I don't know what's going on. I mean, it's odd that they should persist and that they should be experientially available. I mean, you have to understand, a different person saying this to you, it would be a whole different thing. If it was Madame so-and-so Egyptian and so forth and so on. I'm pushed to this stuff by experience, because my inclination is toward reason. It's just that everybody moves along safe channels. Everybody stays out of the fast lane. And if you move to the edges, and drugs are certainly an edge, and a full exploration of one's sexuality is certainly an edge, and going off to weird corners of the world and staying long periods of time is certainly another edge. And if you do these kinds of full affirming world of white-bread, European, bourgeois, work-hard types, just looks as weird as any cultural adaptation could possibly be. I have said many times, and you probably agree to some degree, that reality is created by language. But we don't realize how true this is, that reality really is created by language, and that we are all imprisoned in somebody else's language. This isn't how we want to talk. Most of the words, I'd say 90% of the words and constructions we use would be great-grandfather. We are living inside a 90% 19th century worldview. And culture cannot evolve any faster than its language evolves, because what cannot be said cannot be done. What cannot be said cannot be put in place. So in a way, one way of thinking about psychedelics is that they empower language. It's a way to force the evolution of language. The way you stretch the envelope of culture is by creating language. Everybody, this happens unconsciously in society, Hasidic Jews or reggae people or whatever, the way they create their boundaries is through language, the Catholic Church, this is how they do it. Speaking Yiddish is a way to do it. You create a new reality inside the old one, and you can do it by moving backward into a specialized language, or you can move forward into a new language. Look at how the introduction of the computer has transformed our language in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, draw, CPU, throughput, output, input, bug, glitch, all of this stuff. These are words that have been empowered by our involvement with a machine. Now, before that, the major influence on language in my lifetime was the LSD episode of the 1960s, and it always amuses me how much time and energy the establishment spends on heaping abuse on hippie talk. And it's even now, it's sold to you guys as West Coast talk. It's sold on the West Coast as LA talk. It's sold where you are, you're close to it, but not of it. It's like they used to say of the Watergate scandal, linked but not tainted. And what LSD did, I mean, I can remember, if I can remember, words like, or a concept like ego trip. The first time I heard that, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't have the concept. Well, then once somebody explains to you the concept, then you've got it. Vibes. That notion introduced a whole bunch of people to the idea of emotions. You said, you walk into a room, it was a bad vibe, man. Means that there's no rational deconstruction of what was going on, but you could just tell it was not a place you wanted to be. So it began to empower new realities that were able to emerge. And it was very important, I think, to the establishment to suppress that, because new words are the beginnings of new realities. That, the gay thing is an interesting example of that. I mean, it goes from, what was it called in the 19th century? The love that dare not speak its name. Interesting. You see, it was there, but you dare not speak its name. Somehow to name it was to bring it too much into the forefront. And people who were gay, nobody could, anybody, I mean, it was worse than being a communist. Now, it's empowered. And all the various racial groups who have had to come up through the American meat grinder have had to create vocabularies of community that they were proud of, rather than accepting the vocabulary of the dominator culture. I mean, a good example is the NAACP. The words colored people is embedded there, and yet these were the sincerest and most radical people in that movement. At a certain point, they did the dominator designation for their subgroup and constantly oppressed minorities are trying to get the language right. And it's important for us to do this too. I mean, are we stoners? Are we heads? Are we shaman? What are we exactly? Well, pouring psychedelic substances into that mix then opens the doorway for the logos to define you.